Now we're going to go to the next step. I'm going to introduce you to the behavior screen. Now this is a model that Dr. Thomas Gordon developed some years ago, and he wrote and showed in his book called Leadership Effectiveness Training, which has been since republished many times in many, many languages all over the world. And it has been applied to various scenarios. And in fact, most really good communication programs derive some aspects of it from Dr. Thomas Gordon's work. So let's begin. First of all, Dr. Thomas Gordon said it's really helpful if we can practice developing what's called a behavior screen. Now, in a behavior screen, actually, what we see everywhere are behaviors. People behaving. We're looking through a screen and seeing people behaving around us. Behaving everywhere. Everyone's behaving. Believe me, there's lots of behavior going on around you, and there's behavior going on all over the shop. Behavior. Except if only this was the case. What he recognized is that it's actually very tricky to look around us and just see the behavior. In actual fact, our mind is so apt to conceptualize, to draw an inference. We're so fast at doing it that we barely notice the behavior that's around us. But in actual fact, it's critical that we can see it and notice the actual behavior for reasons that I'll explain later on. So what does our mind do instead of seeing behavior? Because in actual fact, we tend to overlook the behavior. Well, this is where the work, whereas this work is Dr. Thomas Gordon, this work that I'm going to share with you now is Professor Chris Argyris. Chris Argyris, from Harvard University, some years ago, developed the most beautiful model to explain how it is that we don't stay with the behavior. He said there's a ladder inside our mind. There's a ladder inside our mind, and the ladder is called the ladder of inference. The ladder of inference. And he said that it starts at the bottom with data. So in this case, the bottom of the ladder is the behavior. So that is what people are doing or saying. That's the data that happens that we observe in the first case. The truth is, though, that we are so fast at processing and drawing inference from this data that we barely notice the data in the first place. So, for instance, let's have an experiment together. I wonder whether someone might be able to call out an example of a behavior from the last exercise that you found kind of irritating and problematic. The more irritating, the better, actually. So the data is that they come to me, complain about others, then say, don't do anything. Then they'll say, don't do anything. So that's the actual behavior that we're seeing. They approach you, they say, Bill is not doing this or is doing something, and it's a real shit and I don't like it, but I don't want you to do anything about it. In actual fact, you could even stop this. People come to me and complain about others. This example could even stop here, but I like the little twist that we've added. Oh, but don't do anything about it. Okay, so what do we do with this? The next thing that our mind does, and Chris Argyris' initial ladder actually had 7 steps. I'm going to make it a bit simpler. We'll just go to 4. And in this case, what we actually do is we categorize it, or we label the data. Or let's put categorize. Categorize the behavior. So, as an example, how might you describe that behavior? Just in simple terms, not the person right now, but how might you describe the behavior of doing something like that? They're venting. They're venting. Nice. Now, others of you may categorize it a little differently. So this is one example of what you might categorize. Now, the next thing is we go to assumptions. in our own mind, we're very quick at going to assumptions, and especially assumptions about motive. Motive. Now, I know you can't be sure of this, but when you think less generously about this particular person who's doing this behavior, what might you imagine their motive could be? What's an example of what you think they could be trying to do in doing this? Aha.
So if they don't want to go back to the person, you kind of question whether there's truth behind it. Because that person doesn't have an opportunity to correct it or defend what they're saying to you.
Yes, absolutely. So they're white-handing. In other words, if I understand you correctly with white-handing, they're trying to erode your own view of the other person. Yes, I see your nod. Thank you. So they're white-anting you. They're trying to white-ant the other person, in effect, by somehow impacting and maybe poisoning a little bit how you view the other person. Lovely. Let's imagine that's their assumption. And by the way, once again, different people will assume a different motive. This is one example. You may have a different motive may come to your mind. And then finally, let's look at conclusions. But in particular, what kind of conclusions do we draw about the person? Because that's where we tend to go. We're drawing conclusions about the person. We've categorized, we've got assumptions. Then that person is that person is just, or what they're kind of really doing is, so this is going to be a little more up the ladder of inference now. What can anyone give? Now, of course, it'll be different for different people. What would be an example? What would you think of such a person who does this? Let's imagine it's not just a one-off, right? They're doing it regularly. What do you think about it? Catherine?
Troublemaker.
Great. Lovely. Let's hear another. This person is a troublemaker. Can I hear another one?
Player.
Could you repeat that?
Player.
They're a player. Yeah. And by that I mean, I think I hear you say, Elizabeth, they're a manipulator. Yeah, I get that. Is there one other thing? How would you describe such a person? Yes, psychopath, insecure. So,
Sorry, I think we really need to be careful with that sort of label. I'm really uncomfortable with someone saying psychopath.
yeah, thank you. And I want to let you know that that's the very nature of our ladder, because our ladder is such that we will build from data, categorize, go to motives and assumptions and conclusions. And in actual fact, whether we ever say it out loud, these are the things that are in our head sometimes. Now, we may have more sense, to Fiona's point, to ever say out loud this person might be a psychopath. But in actual fact, the ladder of inference is an internal thing. It's just the thinking, and we're giving visibility of it. And I hear you that's kind of distasteful, but in actual fact, it may not for others. Others may find the fact of saying someone's a player might be kind of distasteful as well. These are the things we don't tend to say out loud because of the nature of them. We're building inferences. The difficulty is we are so fast up this ladder. We're really fast up this ladder. And now, if we go up the ladder kind of routinely, and if it's the same person, and I want to let you know, you go up the ladder faster where there is stronger feeling. We go up the ladder faster where there is stronger feeling. And where we do it repetitively. Now, here's what happens with that. Once we reach, let's imagine we've reached the conclusion that this person is a troublemaker. Let's imagine that there's that running around in our head, troublemaker. This person's a troublemaker. Then what happens is, this is how our mind works. We've entertained that conclusion, and then this is what happens. We get really, really good at collecting data consistent with the conclusion. We get really good at it. So, in actual fact, there is a wealth of data. Now I'm just going to draw on this diagram, and I'm going to make it a little messy, but there's a wealth of data down here. In fact, it's almost unlimited that we're surrounded with as we interact with people. And as we entertain conclusions, we get very, very good at picking up little bits of data, little bits of behavior that you see, which is in some way you can draw a connection. You know, you can walk across, when we were working face-to-face as an example, and I'm sure we'll do that again, you might just walk past a meeting room and you see that same person sitting there, and they're just stretching their arms out like that, and they're leaning back, and you walk past and go, oh God, there's that guy, look at him. There he is. That guy, look at the way he's doing that. He's got something going on. He's playing our game, that's for sure. I see it now. Or all this person might need to do is arrive at a meeting 10 minutes late with just a little too much energy or a little bit too much attracting attention, and you're thinking, gotcha, troublemaking again. So we get especially good at picking up data to support our conclusions. In actual fact, on the same data, two people might construct completely different ladders and arrive at completely different conclusions from the same data. Indeed, we might even do that at different times, depending upon our mood or our temperament. But especially different people will create different ladders. The first instance is, let's be aware of the ladder itself. So when I come in to work with conflict, and over many years I've done lots of work with conflict between pairs and in groups, I have to let you know that when conflict emerges, it's almost certainly what's happened is someone has mistaken the conclusion for the data. So I'll say, okay, Mary, tell me a little bit about Bob and what's going on. And Mary will say, almost certainly, give me something that's at the top of the ladder. Well, he's a troublemaker. The issue is Bob's a troublemaker. And as long as that gets dealt with, I'm fine, but he's actually just a troublemaker. And I go, okay. And then I realize she's at the top of the ladder. She doesn't know it. She thinks she's dealing with a fact, a verifiable fact. I have a troublemaker on my hands. This is not to be challenged, Paul. I have a troublemaker, and as long as you know that, then we can work together. And in actual fact, what's being mistaken is everything above data, everything above this line here is fluff. It's just stuff my mind's making up. It might be a little bit true, it might not be. What the truth is, it's fluff. It's not data, it's my inference off the data. So the more charge we get, the more we flip the ladder upside down and consider that the top is actually the data. And that gets it, and so the short answer, that's the longer answer. But now I'll return to the short answer is, yes, Catherine, I love the way you've put that. We are to challenge our assumptions. But I want to let you know it's more insidious than we think, and it's a little more challenging, especially when our feeling is strong. It takes time. This is quick, fast, instantaneous, and applied completely arbitrarily on situations. It gives us, in fact, Chris Argyris used to say, because off this, by the way, we usually act. It's another step on the ladder. There's an act that we take based on this conclusion. And the act that we take, Chris Argyris used to call this, is skillful incompetence. Often what was done was skillful. You just magically avoid someone or look to marginalize someone in a meeting or look to say something. You do something that was kind of skillful but incompetent. Acts based on this are usually skillfully incompetent. So this is the ladder of inference, and this is how our mind works. And I want to let you know it gives us a hint to how we address people. Because you can imagine, let's imagine that Elizabeth wanted to go and speak to this person. And she says, okay, I'm going to take courage in hand, I'm going to talk to them and say, Mary, I want to talk to you. Basically, I've got an issue with how you kind of seem to be consistently kind of making trouble. You just seem to be stirring things up, and it's really problematic. Look, I know this is hard to say, and I'm practicing my best skills here now with you, But in actual fact, you seem to just see being kind of manipulative. You're kind of a player in this team, and I think it's your team player problem that I want to discuss with you now. Are you okay to have that conversation with me, Mary? Because I'm doing my best just to turn up with you and be congruent and, don't make the messenger the bad guy here. Do you know what I mean? And the problem is Elizabeth doing that, she's speaking from the top of her ladder. She's talking from here. And that, my friends, is the big error. We do not want to talk from the top of our ladder. It's very unhelpful, and it'll almost certainly create defensiveness in others. You have a top of your ladder, we need to acknowledge it, and don't tell them what it is. Just don't tell them. We need to address the behavior. And when we do that, we are far less likely to create defensiveness in others. But unless we're aware of the behavior, we may mistake our conclusions for the data itself. So let's go back. Thank you very much for that. Let's go back to this, because the reality is, Thomas Gordon said, let's be awake to the behavior and be aware of the inferences that you might be aware, so that you can come back to the actual data. And then he said, okay, here's where it gets kind of interesting. He said, let's put the behaviors that you find are problematic, that when someone else does that behavior that might threaten your needs in some way, that appears on the bottom part of your screen. Let's just imagine those behaviors appear on the bottom part of your screen. And for Elizabeth, that behavior appears here. It doesn't matter who does it. It could be a hunky-dory or it could be a prickly person. The reality is that is not okay with her. Now, it doesn't mean she has to do anything about it yet, but that's something that doesn't sit well with her, and at one level or another threatens her needs. So that appears at the bottom part of the screen. That appears at the bottom part of the screen. And those behaviors are there. He went on to say that, guess what? There's another line. Behaviors in the top part of the screen. Oh, and I'll just write something in here. These behaviors are unacceptable to me, down here. And these behaviors are when someone else is upset. So they're giving signals that they're hurt, they're embarrassed, they're withdrawn, they don't feel safe. We call them, Thomas Gordon's called them signaling behavior. Signaling behavior. And this is an absolutely critical distinction to make. Some behaviors are others signaling, and some behaviors are unacceptable to me, and no one is appearing on your screen in both places at the same time. They're one or the other. The behavior in the middle is what we call the no problem zone. This is where, hey, Bill, could you just send me that link to that Zoom meeting? Sure, no problem. Hey, did you get a summary of that meeting yesterday? Because I didn't hear it. I wasn't there. Yeah, that's great. Hey, I wonder whether you could just... And there's the natural to and fro, the office business interactions that we have where no one is signaling and no one is behaving in a way that's unacceptable to the other person. That's the no problem zone. Now, here's the thing that he was really nailed. Thomas Gordon really nailed this. He actually asked this really critical question. When you're exposed to someone who's doing a behavior, they're playing loud music, for instance, outside your office or outside your house, the question Thomas Gordon asks is, whose problem is that? Who owns the problem? And as many of you are actually already saying, he said, when it's me looking through the screen, I own the problem. I have the problem when someone's doing something around me that's unacceptable. Now, this is really critical distinction. We own that problem. We can take our options to act or otherwise. We have a problem. And when someone comes into your home or your office or into your Zoom meeting and says, oh gosh, this is so hard. I don't know what I'm going to do about this. So can you hear my voice? They're signaling anxiety, concern of some kind or another. The question he asks is, whose problem is that? And here's the interesting thing. The answer is, they own the problem. Not you. They do. Now that may sound heartless, but here's the critical piece. If we go buying into that problem, we will be less effective. Far less effective. If we want to help people who are signaling, we must start with the premise that it's their problem, not ours. Because the moment we take on that as our problem, we start to get into tasks and activities that are not ours to do. And it prevents us from doing something really, really critical. It prevents us from listening. Our first priority is to listen when someone else is signaling. If we take that problem, we are unlikely to listen. So they own the problem. Down here, we own the problem. What do we do in response to that? Out here is where we assert. And we assert by using a 3-part I message, which I'll describe shortly. So here it is. In any conversation you're in, you can determine where this person is appearing on your screen. Are they signaling? And if they are, your task is just to listen. And if they are behaving in a way that is unacceptable to you, your task is either to say, get over it, Paul. I changed my mind. This behavior is now no problem zone. But be careful of making that decision too quickly, because you might be just trying to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. But you can decide to do that. You can decide to change your mind if you wish. You can decide it is a behavior that's concerning me and I need to have a conversation about it. Or you can decide to simply see the behavior and whinge about it to others. That's also an option for you. And I can promise you I've done that from time to time. But either way, you can change your mind, you can whinge to others, but I want to let you know your creative leader self is more likely to take that option. And you'll do it with an I message that we'll talk about in due course. So this is the behavior screen. It's a terrific challenge to stick with the behavior rather than continue to conceptualize and make inference from behavior. And the more we do that, the more we see behavior consistent with it, and the more likely we are to hold on to the conclusion as if it's the data. And the more we do that, we are unable to talk about it. In the circumstance before, you can imagine Elizabeth is very unlikely to go to her colleague and say, I need to talk about your troublemaking. It's preposterous, right? We know that conversation is going to go badly. But if we go up the ladder as often as we tend to, and then we see more data, that's the rhetoric, the internal rhetoric we have, and then we miss what the actual data is, because guess what? We need to talk about the behavior when we speak to these people, not our conclusions. That's just fluff. That is just fluff.